All right, we are ready. It is Tuesday, November 7th, 2023, and it's about 1:32 p.m., and you are at a Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting. Welcome, everybody. Everybody is here in person on the commission. Thank you for joining us. First item on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the October 10th and 17th, 2023 meetings. I have a motion by Alder Herbst and a second by Commissioner Jean. It looks like Commissioner Robinson has something to say.
We really don't have minutes from an October 10th meeting because it didn't take place. So really, shouldn't the motion be to approve the minutes of the meeting that took place?
Yes. Without objection, maybe we can just make sure that's what we're approving right now. Okay, looks like I'm getting nods. All right, any feedback on the minutes of October 17th? Alrighty, all of those in favor of approving the minutes from the October 17th, 2023 meeting can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposition? All right, thank you, everyone. Next up is the Director's Report on Utility Operations. I will pass it over to Mr. Lindman.
Yeah, there's a list of items if commissioners have any questions.
Mr. Robinson.
Surprise. So, as it relates to the water facility construction update, it looks like the accelerated schedule is not going to take place because of additional costs. What impact does that have on the ion exchange resin and our need for potentially another change out to deal with PFAS in the interim until that GAC system is up in place?
It's going to be right on the edge, John. The accelerated construction schedule is not going to work out because the manufacturers couldn't guarantee the equipment. So it didn't pay to incur the additional costs without any guarantee that we could have the facility up and running at an accelerated rate. So we're going to be right on the cusp of another change out. It's going to be up in the air until we get there.
Can we, and there's no way of incentivizing manufacturing
The
delivery?
manufacturers aren't going to promise us any dates. The construction, the general contractor on the project and some of the subs have guaranteed us that they're going to do everything they can to accelerate the schedule to where they can possibly do it, but there's no guarantees.
Okay. Another question? Nope. Anyone else? Mr. Force.
I guess I'm over here.
So we could experience delays, right, that would take us farther out, and that's not unusual these days.
Not really. Given our last construction project that went over almost 2 years, it's probably going to be something that we're going to have to deal with.
So this would have some serious budget impact for next year if we had to do another change out.
The change-out's already been budgeted in the project, so the extra 1.1 million has been, for the immediate change-out is already included in those costs, but we may not have to incur those costs if we can keep our PFAS levels low on the ion exchange resin prior to having the carbon put in place.
So we'd budgeted for a second resin change out,
Correct.
and we might not, if we're lucky,
Correct.
have to spend that money.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson.
With that end, are we monitoring the individual wells for, pre-treatment PFAS numbers?
We are not. We're currently through EPA sampling checking influent, but both rounds of sampling that we had done of raw water in the past showed similar numbers, 30 to 40 parts per well. Given the prevalence of PFAS in our neighboring communities within the wells being similar, I don't believe that there's any reason to keep sampling those wells.
I was just going to say if we could rotate wells, if that was material to the influent,
No.
the quality of the
Our
influent.
numbers are pretty close, 30 to 40 parts.
Okay. Mr. Jean and then Dawn, Ms. Herbst. Yep.
I see it's not noted in the director's report, but I think we should recognize Mr. Ben Brooks as now the vice chair of the Wisconsin Wastewater Operators Association, and it was unanimous. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yep. Alder Herbst.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Ben. I, of course, was disturbed again, as usual, to see that we have somebody that has resigned. And from what I understand, that lab technician was with you for about, what, 3 years? Or less?
So Tyler was there before I came on board in December 21. And his, he left to be with his wife in Texas.
Okay.
So,
So
legitimate
it
reason.
wasn't a wage situation at this point?
Correct.
And at this, I understand from what I read that HR is working on interviews?
Correct. We're working through the process of a possible retitle of the lab tech position, working through some details right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Further questions or comments? Okay. Well, then let's move on to item number 3, discussion and possible action on approving an ordinance amendment for mandatory lead service line replacement.
So we had brought a draft last month for this. Teagan in the legal office and myself, we worked also with Horsley Witten, who had reviewed this for us as well through the lead service accelerator program. So we've incorporated those comments and recommendations that we felt were pertinent to the city of Wausau. So.
Mr. Robinson.
Guess I've got a number of questions. Some of them will be more nitpicky. Some of them deal with in the intent and purpose section, but we start with continue to, and then on number 5, limit. I just think that our goal is to reduce, meet, and affect versus, and to ensure. I don't know that continue to adds value to that. But then I did have questions relative to, we use in some areas of the draft, and again, these are technical, but we use the utility or the Wausau water utility, and then we use the water utility system, just from a consistency perspective. I would just ask that the attorneys look at that, because we don't define the system, and does that create confusion? And then finally, the role of the commission looks like we are involved in developing guidance and also involved in exemptions. How do you proceed if this goes forward? How do you perceive the commission being involved in the development of the guidance and development of the exemptions? And there are roles for the Director of Public Works in the utilities, and then there's the Director of Water Utility from the perspective of administration. I think one of the appeals comes to the commission. I know in the county that they've got a separate process where appeals go basically to the administrator. Is that consistent with city policy where things go to the governing body, or do they go to an arbitrator, an assigned person within administration? And then the final question deals with, one is there's 2 other questions. One deals with the period of time. This says 7 years. We've talked about 5 and 15. So are we, by adopting this ordinance, going with a 7-year period with exemptions, or, based upon funding, those, and then I continue to be concerned about what the cost might be, and I know that's a difficult, but on the city side, the utility side, and then on the private owner side, we still don't have those numbers. We've got ranges, and I know that's difficult to do, but it would be helpful to know that before we vote on it.
So that was a lot. I don't know if I remember all of it, but I think the wording changes and stuff, the consistencies, I think we can go through there, John, and try to figure that out. The 7 years versus 5 years, the reason the 7 years was put in there wasn't the fact that we were, because of the delay in the funding, right? So if we go and request funding for 5 years, that last year of funding, we're probably not going to be spending for 6 or 7, till year 6 or year 7. So that's the reason, the duration of this is going to be longer, right? As far as, as far as the commission and its role, there's some things as we move forward that the commission has to consider, right? And you're right, those are budget impacts, right? And we don't have a firm value on those. We have a pretty good value on what it's going to be on the public side. On our side is we're estimating probably 2,500, and so the fiscal impact here is potentially $25 million in loan over the 5 years. That's what's on the resolution right now. On the private side, we are getting principal forgiveness every year, or at least that's the goal, right? And that's what's been promised by the state and the federal government, right? But that isn't 100%. And so this year we're anticipating an 80-20 on the private side. So a discussion has to be made about who's going to pay for that other 20%. Is that going to be the utility? Is that going to be the city? Is that going to be, is there going to be a loan program for the residents? So that is going to be the next step for 2024 on where those additional funds and those matching funds are going to be paid back. Yeah. But we're also working with CIP. I want this, they are working to try to fill that funding gap with other funding sources as well. So, and that was one of the major reasons that we hired them as well, is because of their knowledge and resources to try to access additional funding outside of our normal channels. Yeah, to fill that gap.
And just to add in a little bit of more color, if we're using bipartisan infrastructure law funding, the private side, those folks won't be able to directly pay for this. Like, we have to cover the cost of it. So that's another kind of thing that we need to consider as we're looking at this. Other comments? Mr. Force.
Eric, what's the timing here? It seems like, based on your recent remarks here, there's still a lot of questions regarding financing. Mm-hmm. Do we need to put a mandatory ordinance in place now before we have answers that customers might be asking about who's going to pay for this? Do we have the cart in front of the horse, in other words?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that we have the cart in front of the horse. I think that one of the things is I want to make sure that everybody's aware of the ordinance requirement, right? And so we'll have to have this ordinance in place when we submit an application to the PSC, for the potential use of utility revenue funds for the private side. So right now, the PSC will only allow you to pay up to 50% of a private side lead service line lateral if you have their prior approval. And so, and part of that is the ordinance. And, we're working with Horsley Witten to have that PSC application put together, so that's not ready to be submitted at this point, Jim. So if there's, additional discussions, but I will tell you, financially moving forward beyond 24, I don't know what those impacts are going to be. We can only make our best assumptions. And so I know the mayor and I have spoken about having discussions too about, subsidies and other parts of the lead service line on the private side and what that means, what options are for us. And we're going to be having that discussion with CIP as well. So,
But maybe to address the question, I don't know the deadline of the application that we're talking about, but in my mind, I think that when we're talking about an ordinance like this, it would be worth our time to get some public feedback from folks, make sure that everyone's aware, allow people to sound off and, have us listen to them. I think there's time for us because we have many more lead service lines and people who want them replaced than we have the funding for right now. So it doesn't feel to me that this is our hair isn't on fire.
Correct. You're correct.
I think we have time to be
Yep.
thoughtful and engage the public in this. What else?
So is it, I mean, I'm trying to get from the commission exactly what are the, significant concerns that you have? Is it just the fiscal impacts? Is it, what is that?
Mr. Force?
Well, it's the fiscal impact on individual homeowners, but it's also the requirement that all homeowners replace lead lines or galvanized lines if that's what they have servicing their home. That's the public feedback that I've received, is the fact that if it's mandatory, they have to do it, even if they don't want to do it, or if they have some good reason for not doing it. We've talked about this in the past, and I think at the last meeting, we talked about trenchless excavation to put these lines in, which I was pleased to hear that that's the default approach unless it absolutely doesn't work. Because the concerns that I'm getting are people who have driveways, garages, decks, stonework that they fear is going to be torn up in order to put this line in. And if there's a way of reassuring them that that is not the common practice, I think that's helpful. Regarding the wording in the ordinance itself, I'm looking for some language that provides at least a discussion between the homeowner who objects and the utility who is trying to enforce. And I don't find a whole lot. I don't have anything drafted that would replace what's here, but those are my two concerns, and the latter one is probably a bigger concern. That is the resident who is protesting the mandatory requirement.
We want to understand that process and how exactly that looks. Yeah. Mr. Robinson?
think
I
that's
I
good
believe that that's
feedback.
addressed under 1366-090, under the exemptions upon demonstration of a compelling need, the owner of a single-family dwelling or a business, may request a change in schedule or an extension of time. But then the guidelines for consideration is what's developed by the Wausau Waterworks Commission. And I think we would want to have a little bit better idea of what those guidelines would be, those parameters might be, before we go ahead with the ordinance. So I guess that was the question about the role of the commission. I think it's better to have a policy and clearer expectations in place up front. But I strongly support the concept of taking this out for hearing. So my understanding of this then is that by making it a mandatory ordinance, we qualify for we qualify for covering the cost through our utility rates, which creates another funding source for those people that can't pay. And if we take the bill dollars, we can't charge for the private side, so there are no costs to the individual property owner. So the issue would then be disturbance of property or some other extenuating circumstances that the commission would then do it. It wouldn't be financial, with the exception of, the concern is that if we add another 25 million onto the water rates, that's excessive, and particularly in light of what we've gone through. So I think we have to give some thought to what that might mean, what we can leverage to reduce that 25 million to a reasonable sum that people can afford. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to go into this, and I think that part of that should be done as we roll this out to the public hearing.
So, and that's fine. I think, I want the commission to be very comfortable on moving forward, right? So I don't know then that this will be ready for the 2024 construction season. And, which is fine, it's just, there's two reasons to do the mandatory ordinance, or the primary reasons, right? One is for the PSC to be able to use utility user rates. The other one is it gains us additional points when we apply for lead service line replacement funding with the DNR. So it's part of their criteria. So we've already submitted the intent to apply for the 2025 construction year, and so those applications will be due, I believe, in June or September, I can't remember. So, yeah, yeah.
Mr. Robinson?
So with that schedule, do we have, what is our drop dead date on an ordinance? Is it, we've done the intent to apply, but the applications are due at a later date.
Right.
So
if we
they
said-
need to be in place not when the intent to apply is submitted, but rather when the grant application is made?
Yeah, when they actually score the projects. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ITA, they do a tentative score on those, or they don't score those at all, and it's just based on the applications.
They just check for eligibility.
Yeah.
Through the IPA and then, or
Yep.
ITA, and then they look at scoring come June when the actual applications
Correct.
are in.
Yeah.
So then I would request that we try to develop a timeline of when we would need to take action, understanding that it isn't this commission that enacts the ordinance, it's the city council.
That's correct.
So we would need to make sure that we build that time in, and then I think we would want to begin to look at what the expectations of this commission are relative to those exemptions and policies and procedure. And then finally, I think we need to have a better handle on what the exposure is relative to the ratepayer, both those that don't have, that currently have non-complying public and private side, but then also those that are in compliance, because those costs will shift to them as well.
Further discussion. Mr. Force?
Mayor, do you have an idea of when you might have a public session on this document?
No, I feel like that's part of the development of this timeline.
Okay. I mean, I could fiddle and make changes in this that I think need to be made, but that really is pointless. I think maybe it's this document that we take before the public and get their input before we start making changes on our own or suggestions on our own.
What does the rest of this body think? Shrugs.
Mayor, may I?
Sure.
And there is one other item with the ordinance. It does incentivize non-partial replacements. So currently with our street reconstruction projects, we're still allowed to do partial replacements. But as everybody knows, with partial replacements, there's a higher availability or process where lead can be released into the water with the disturbance on the line. So an ordinance would also reduce partial replacements. Just a thought.
Okay. Further discussion. So maybe what I'm hearing is you'd like us to take a stab at establishing a timeline, talking through what those public engagement sessions look like, talking through effects on customers, both monetarily and their homes and yards. Okay. All right. Are you looking to speak? Okay. This is an alder person, which is why I'm allowing to speak.
Thank you,
Alder
Madam
Killian,
Chair. I
yes.
appreciate it. I'll keep it brief, and thank you for the discussion on this matter. You brought up the public engagement component, and I think just because this is so far-reaching throughout the community that it's going to impact a lot of different segments with perhaps different needs depending on the given situation. So, I was just wondering if it's possible to develop kind of a language access plan if the commission does not already have one, so that not only are there their resources to be leveraged in the communication process, but that the commission sets forth and perhaps codifies requirements in that realm. And my understanding, my limited understanding of what may happen with a CIP partnership is it may involve some of those components, but I think it would just be nice to see that codified on the city or commission side so that it's not kind of an elective, but that it's baked into the process as a requirement. And I think it would further help with kind of transparency and accountability, that if we do have substantial public-private partnerships, such as with lead and CIP, then so that the council and the public knows right out of the gate kind of what's the nature and expectations with that in terms of those related organizations being subject to open meetings law and requirements, and as well as Wisconsin open records requirements, because I think sometimes when the city or commission is dealing with private parties that's unclear, but I think it's important that those things are known just so that the public has an idea what's going on, can participate, and can see that there's transparency and accountability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will say that with this partnership specifically, we've emphasized the importance of that communication, specifically for folks who don't speak English. We're working with H2N, so both Spanish-speaking folks and Hmong-speaking folks. So that's part of it, but point taken. Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
So I want to pick up on Alder Killian's comments, and we have the ordinance and the guidance that will be developed under that, and then we have the contract. And I think as we begin to look at those timelines, there are the development of plans by CIP that are presented, and there's some milestones and timelines for turnaround and other things. I think as we begin to look at the timeline, if we could incorporate those in there. So for instance, we're looking at fiscal year 2024 now. When will we know what the projects are for fiscal year 24? What is the sort of the start date for 25? Just build those into the timeline so there's an understanding on the part of all parties, us, the council, and the public relative to when those plans might come in. So they've got some warning. We talk in here about at least 30 days on notice, but we're going to give hopefully a lot more than 30 days notice to a lot of these people that may get into when we're dealing with the contractor and the plumber, but I think we're dealing with more notice, and I think that would be helpful.
Good feedback. What else? We're sure we're done talking about, we'll expect a timeline maybe for our next meeting and talk through that, what else we need. Feel free to look through this draft a couple more times and decide if there are things you as policy body need as well. All right, I guess with that, we only have one item left, a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Herbst and a second by Robinson. All in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you.